So there have been discussions around the district's fund balance and what the fund balance is used for, how the district accrues a fund balance, and how we account for it. For example, last year we accrued a much more significant fund balance because we were shut down from in-person instruction in mid-March. So we didn't have buses on the road. We didn't incur a whole lot of overtime. We saved on some areas in terms of the physical plant and facilities. And like many districts, they had an additional fund balance. And that money has certain uses. And as we have been talking about throughout our budget process, Enrique has been sharing a vision and a theory of using the fund balance over time and to offset what would be particularly high potential tax increases as the cessation fund begins to dwindle, as the Indian Point pilot also continues to dwindle, and that is a one-time revenue to offset huge potential tax increases. So we wanted to walk the board and the community one more time through our fund balances, what it can be used for, and I'd even say, Enrique, at the end, if we can remember, talk about how the district is audited, that there is no secret pot of money in the school district. There's no secret bank accounts. The school district's audited annually, oftentimes a couple times a year if the state controller gets involved. And the state controller has been involved in our finances because of the shutdown of Indian Point. So while there are many conversations out there in rumor land, we want to make sure everyone's operating from the same set of data because this is public information and we are a public entity, and we want to make sure everyone understands what we're doing and the vision behind that. So Enrique, go ahead.
Thank you, Joe. I want to start by explaining to the board and the community our fund balance. There's two types of fund balance, what we call an assigned fund balance, that we can use it in any way we want. And then there's the restricted fund balance. For the restricted fund balance, the board in the past set up funds where we can put more money that is restricted only to pay out of those funds. In our case, we have two restricted funds. One is the repair reserve fund, and the other one is the unemployment. Most of the money that we have is in the reserve repair out of the $1.866 million that we have. I'll say about $1.8 million are in the repair reserve, even more, and only about $20,000 is in our unemployment. So let's start with the unassigned fund balance. Unassigned fund balance, this year we started with $10 million, and that's because last year, like Joe said, we had what I call an operating income of $6.3 million. It's really not an operating income. I call it like that because it's the money that we didn't expend or the extra revenues that we got. Obviously, last year, because of COVID, we saved a lot of money in transportation, utilities, etc. So in the 14 years that I've been in the district, by far, this is the highest operating income or fund balance that we had over the past 14 years. So we started our unassigned fund balance at $10.7 million. I expect this year to have around $3.5 million in fund balance from operating income. Like we showed several times during our budget time, we're going to use about $2.2 million to reduce the tax levy, and that brings us up to unassigned fund balance at the end of the year of $12 million. For the restricted, we're not planning to add any money to that balance. We're not planning to take any money out of it. So basically, our total fund balance which is the last three columns, is going to be $13.9 million at the end of this year. If we move forward, I'm expecting to have about $1.5 to $1.5 million in operating income. But again, most of the money is going to be, we're going to use it to reduce the tax levy. Next year, we're planning to use $5.5 million. The following year, 2.5, 3.4, et cetera, et cetera. And like I mentioned several times, the whole purpose of using the unassigned fund balance to reduce the tax levy is to basically try to avoid peak and valleys and know that our tax levies for the next 7 to 8 years are going to be in the 4 to 5% range, rather than that 1 year 1% and the next year 9%. On the restricted fund balance, we really are planning to use very little, only maybe in repairs, about 300,000. Unemployment, definitely we're not planning to use at all, because like I mentioned during our budget time, last year, there were a lot of fraudulent unemployment money that we had to pay. We contested them, and the Department of Labor does not reimburse us money. They reduce future years unemployment claims. So in general, we have about $5,000 to $10,000 in unemployment claims per year. Last year, we got to about $110,000. And we all know that no one was unemployed because we paid absolutely every person what their salary would have been even without COVID. So in that sense, I'm not planning to have any to use any unemployment funds. Actually, probably in a year or two, I will ask the board to have a resolution to take the money out of that reserve and put it somewhere else. But again, it's very little money. We're talking $10,000 to $20,000. So that's where our fund balance is. Fund balance means our savings that we will be using to reduce taxes going forward. This is not money that, yes, we have today $12 million in unassigned fund balance, but that doesn't, or we're going to have $12 million, but that doesn't mean that it's money that we have to pay salaries or to pay anyone. It's money that we're saving because we know that in the future, we're going to need that money so we don't have tax increases of 7, 8, 9%. So I think it's important for the community to understand that we save money because we will need that money going forward. Any questions?
I have one, Enrique. I'm a little bit confused on there's the three groupings there on the left. And in the third part where it has total fund balance beginning of year, and then the second line is add use fund balance during the year, where does that number come from?
For example, if you remember this year, look at the 2020-2021.
Okay.
If you remember, what we agreed was that our fund balance to reduce the taxes for next year, originally it was going to be $1.2 million, but then Finance Committee had a meeting and said, no, we want to reduce the tax because the community is still hurting, and we decided that 4.5% increase is the right increase given the situation. That's that $2.2 million. That's up to the board to decide how much we move forward. Yes, Lisa?
So that is the 2.2 million in that first grouping of numbers. But then
Yeah, in the second grouping, again, is restricted fund balance.
right,
That
got that.
I don't use. I'm not planning to add or reduce anything because it's only for those two funds, the unemployment fund and the repair fund. So I'm not planning to put more money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm planning to take some money probably in 22, 23, not next year. And I just put $150,000 because it's going those years that I put some money is because those are difficult years and I might need to use repair reserves. We use it as needed, but I don't want the board to think that that money is always going to be there and if we need it, we can take it or anything. We use repair reserve some years because we need it and we don't have enough money in the budget. And then the third part are the additions of the prior two. It's the total, meaning unassigned plus restricted.
So is the 1.275, is that what we didn't spend in last year's budget that's being rolled into the fund balance?
Where are you? The one?
The third section down with 1.275 million, the add use fund balance during the year. It's the during the year. Where is that number? Is that what wasn't spent the year prior?
It's the addition of 3.5 million plus the 0 in the restricted, less the 2.2. So we are adding in total 1.275.
I think I got it. Alex, do you understand it now, or do you want me to try to?
Alexandra, so yeah. The total fund balance, we started with 10.7 plus 1.88. Agree? Then we added $3.5 million, but we deducted 2.2, and that gives me the net of 1.2. So we're going to add $1.2 million to our total fund balance.
Okay, okay. So then the 3.5 million that's what we didn't spend last year.
This year, that's what I'm projecting, that we're going to have of operating income, either higher revenues or lower expenses or a combination of both.
Okay, thank you. I got it now. Thank you.
So I want to jump in here and say, how does this happen, right? How do you underspend your budget? Well, it can happen easily. We were here a year ago in a pandemic. Schools were officially closed for the rest of the year, and we were building our budget a year ago for this year, apples to apples, not knowing COVID, not knowing a remote model, not knowing a hybrid model, not knowing any of it. So we had to put together our best guess of an operating budget, given the full liability that schools return and we're back to normal. Now, that's not the case, right? We have fewer buses on the road. They're not traveling as much. And so there are certain things that naturally happen that save you money, because we locked in our budget 2 weeks ago in early April, and most of our spending for our budget is not going to happen until September, 5 months later. So things change. People retire. We hire people at lower salaries. We do cooperative bidding for a number of supplies and equipment and oil and diesel. And sometimes, we budget high and we do better than expected. So having a fund balance at the end of the year is a good thing. What it means is that we were anticipating spending X and we spent less than X, and that money goes back to the taxpayer in any number of mechanisms, including what Enrique had just shared. So that's super important for people to understand how the dollars get accounted. And I'll go back a couple of years ago, we had a state controller audit. And the state controller came in because it was on the heels of Indian Point's announcement that they were closing. And basically they said, you need more reserves in order to not tax the community out of their house. Now, that was before we knew a lot about the cessation fund and some other mitigating efforts. So school districts need to have a bank account for a rainy day, because if it rains, we cannot overspend our budget. And we can't just unilaterally levy a tax at a random point in the school year because we say, oh, we under budgeted and we overspent. So this is critically important, because there is chatter out there about $5 million being hidden. That's nonsense. And I'm using those words very deliberately. We are a public entity. We're audited multiple times. Our books are open. We have an external audit every year. The controller's been in about every 3 years. Those are public documents that the board approves, and that we're demonstrating in a fiscally uncertain time, fiscal constraint and some responsibility, so that, as Enrique said, we don't have 1 year of a 1% tax increase and then have to make up for it the next 2 years with a 9% increase. We're trying to use the reserves to manage what we know could be some peaks and valleys. So I don't want to repeat everything, but it's critically important that folks understand how a district accrues a fund balance. And when you have an $80+ million budget, and you budget for your full liability, what you expect to spend, and if you come in under, that's not a bad thing, because those dollars are used to offset tax increases or to build programs for kids in the future.
And I want to add the fact that this is a business, but unlike any other business, in the sense that, let's say I'm in a regular business and I expend more, I can bring more revenue. In any other business, it's good times. I hire someone else because I know that my revenues are going to be greater. Here, I don't have that. I know my revenues, and I cannot overexpend because I don't have a way of paying it, because my revenues will never go up. They are set the day that the board sets the budget. So I cannot be tied like a corporation to say, okay, my income is going to be whatever it is, and if I bring more revenues, I can get more expenses. I cannot do that. So I cannot budget, for example, legal fees, 100,000, because if I have a lawsuit, even though in the past 3 years we have only spent 80,000, I cannot do it, because if I get a lawsuit and I have to pay another $40,000, I need to have that money because I don't have extra revenues. So that's what many people don't understand about school districts. You cannot add revenues during that school year. April, when the board votes for the budget, my revenues are set. I might make a couple of hundreds or $1,000 by selling equipment, by anything like that. But at the end of the day, they are set. I know for good that I'm going to get X amount of money. No matter what happens, that's the difference between a school district and a regular business. In a regular business, you don't have your revenue set. I do. I don't have to go out and sell more gadgets. I don't have to do anything, because I know that if the board approves $82 million, I'm going to get $82 million. But if there's a problem and I need to expend more than 82 million, I can't, because I cannot raise more revenues. So that's why the fund balance is so important.
Bill, you have a question? Yes, Enrique, on this schedule, the unassigned fund balance looks like it gets quite low in the last 4 years on this schedule. What was our typical, I'm referring to the unassigned fund balance specifically. Yeah. What did we typically have that at pre-Entergy announcing their withdrawal? Because it looks like it's getting low in those last 4 years of this.
Getting very tight. Usually we had it at 3% of the budget. So let's say it was about $2 million. At one point during 2011, when the economy was doing very poorly, we were at 500,000. That's the lowest we've been since I've been here. But I will say that about 3% has been of the following budget has been the average. So if you take into account back then that it was a $70 million budget, we were about $2 to $2.1 million.
Okay, so even though we're going through this long-range planning, and right now it looks like there's sufficient fund balance, when you do the long-range planning, it's getting tight towards the end.
Very tight. However, this is a however, Bill. I'm being very conservative. For me, in these projections, I have, starting on 2025, 26, only $2.2 million of pilot payments from Holtec Entergy from Indian Point. That number can triple, but that's the number that we have today, and that's the number that I'm using.
And we're anticipating and hoping for a lot more than that, correct?
That's what I'm saying. I'm anticipating 10 million, maybe 8, but definitely more than 2. And let's say that it's 5. You're talking $3 million more in fund balance starting in 26, 27.
Okay, so there's, although this is a good projection,
it's
just that, a projection, and there's a lot of variables to be determined. Stay tuned.
Yes, and again, there's 2 reasons why I like to do it like that. Reason number 1 is because I like to be conservative. I prefer to have the surprise to the upside and to the downside. And second, because that was the only part that the state controller disagreed with me, even though I explained why, and I explained that some of the maturities of our bonds were coming down. They like, and I understand as a government entity, to be as conservative as possible, and that's what I did.
Thank you, Enrique.
Any other comments or questions? I'm sorry, Enrique.
Sorry, that's you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Enrique. I think we can move on to our next presentation.
That it's me again. Greg, please, my next presentation. Joe and I wanted to discuss also with the board and with the community about contingent budget, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what contingent budget is. The last time we were in contingent budget, I wasn't even in the district. It was 2 years before I came to the district, so it was 2006. So probably most of the families that have children in the district, they never went through any contingent budget, so they don't understand what it is. And I want to explain to everyone, definitely no one Maybe Mary Pat was in the board back then, but I think she was the only one, if anything, if anyone, what a contingent budget means, because everyone needs to understand it to see how detrimental to the education of our children will be. So there's certain rules under contingent budget. First of all, we cannot rent equipment, we cannot rent computers. So basically our leases that we do every year are gone. Rental of office equipment, we do very little. Outside organizations are not allowed except when there is no cost to the district. That it never happens, because even if it's the custodian spending half an hour cleaning behind it, then it's not allowed. So all these organizations that use our facilities, they won't be able to use it. Capital expenditures are forbidden except in an emergency. Uniforms are prohibited, and every year we buy uniforms for athletics. We also have a cycle, like for example, this year, after 7 years, we're buying the uniforms for the football team. That would not be possible next year. Purchase of equipment is not allowed. And finally, the administrative component of the contingency budget is capped at the percentage of last year. In that sense, as it is today, we're below, so we will have to go to also administrative, but even today we're below last year. So how do we calculate contingent budget? We look at last year's approved tax levy. To that number, we add this year's non-property tax revenues, and that gives us our contingent budget. So for example, last year we approved a levy of $46,348,822. To that number, we add the non-property tax revenue of this year, $35.8 million, and that gives us $82.2 million, the maximum that we can spend under contingent. Next. So on the left, you have our proposed budget that the board approved a couple of weeks ago. And our proposed, and you can see here non-property tax revenue, the $35.8 million from last slide. And here you can see our proposed budget of $84 million, our proposed tax levy of 43, and our tax cap of 53. That tax cap doesn't matter in this case. Now, our contingent budget will be the $35.8 million, and plus the tax levy of $48 million from last year, which gave us a contingent budget of $82 million, which means that we will need to reduce $2 million, close to $2.1 million in expenses to get to the contingent budget. Any questions?
Allie.
So under the regulations, the rental of office equipment, is that no new leases, or will we have to cancel our existing lease contract?
No, we cannot cancel. All our obligations from the past stay there, but the new lease that we are planning to do next year for Laura to buy Chromebooks, we cannot buy the Chromebooks.
Okay, and then for the second one, the outside organizations. Those are like the scouts and the sports and
PYA and even the town of Portland.
Oh, okay. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I think it would help. I'm sorry. I would think it might help if you're looking at cutting $2 million if we went to contingency. What would you do to cut that, to make that gap? What would you what would be something? Would you let teachers go? How would you make up that shortfall?
Wait, before we get to that,
just
can we
so
talk?
People,
no, I know.
So people understand what's at stake.
Right. So can we, let's talk about our options if the budget was voted down.
Exactly.
We don't have to go right to contingent. What are our other options? And then if we took those other options, what would we?
Our main budget goes down, the board can decide to put a second budget that gets voted at I think the third Tuesday in June. The same budget, cut expenses to that budget. It's up to them. Last time that this happened in the district, the year before I came, they put the board decided to put the same budget. The budget was voted down again, and then we had to go to contingent. In this case, it can be, we have two options: put another budget or go directly to contingent. We will never recommend the board to go directly to contingent. We will recommend the board to make some cuts, and we're not ready there. We're not ready to recommend any cuts because
I understand that, but I think to give people an idea of we went to contingent, what would we be facing? What changes would have to happen besides
exactly. Let me just explain our budget very, very generally. We are a service industry, so you can imagine about 75 to 80% of our total expenses are in human beings, meaning the staff. So you can imagine out of $82 million, about $66 million go to benefits and salaries. Materials and supplies represents $1 million. Not even $1 million, but let's say $1 million. Utilities, gas, oil, transportation, that's the rest. I cannot cut, these cuts will not be on materials and supplies. I can promise you that. We can cut materials and supplies or textbooks. We can cut 200,000-300,000. We're talking here teachers. Our average teacher with benefits makes about $120,000. So if we need to cut about $2 million, we need to cut about 15 teachers. That's basically where between teachers, principals, you cannot cut any principals in the elementary schools because there's one per elementary school. Maybe you can cut one in the middle school. I'm talking here, the bottom line is teachers. Teachers is what we need to cut because without principals, you cannot manage a school. Without a superintendent, you can't do it. Without a business manager, you can do it. So at the end of the day, it's teachers. This means the only thing that contingent budget means is bigger class size, period. Nothing else. Coming out of COVID, I think it will be extremely detrimental to our children.
Corey, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. So last year, there was the potential that if the budget was voted down, there was no opportunity for a second vote.
No.
So is that an issue this year again, that could potentially happen?
Last year is like this year. There were two alternatives, either go directly to contingent or decrease the budget.
But there was something last year where I think that they were saying we weren't going to be allowed the whole second vote.
Because of COVID, originally they said that there was going to be no second vote, but I think that at the end, the governor changed his mind and said yes.
Okay. I think that's what happened. Is there any mention of that?
You are correct. You are correct. Okay. Originally,
so for this year, is there any potential of that?
No. We haven't heard anything. I'll say no. Okay. Last year, the governor went back and say, no way, got too much pressure. So I don't think he will change. And this year, I think I haven't heard anything else, is that the budget is going to be a regular budget in person.
Correct. The vote will take place in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was a little different last year, and Corey and Enrique are exactly right. We had this conversation last year, and someone asked the question, if the budget fails, where do you cut? And it was almost verbatim. In addition, you also look at what your non-mandated programs and services are. Kindergarten, as crazy as this sounds, kindergarten is not a mandated service for school districts in New York State. If you look at our elective programs that are middle school and high school, they're not mandated. The only thing that's mandated is that kids in high school have to have elective credit in those areas, but certainly not the offerings and the opportunities we provide. Athletics, our extracurricular clubs and activities, those are all not mandated activities. We take them for granted because they're the fabric of our community or any school community, but we would have to look there too, because we can't cut programs that New York State says students need to experience.
Thank you.
I believe that COVID is going to be an excuse or a reason to get an absentee ballot, though. Is that correct? Where people
I haven't heard anything. I don't know if, Joe, you have heard anything about how this year the budget vote is going to work.
Yeah, I'll let Carmen chime in. She's been working on this. I can tell you that the vote will be in person. However, anyone can, with enough notice and going through the process, can basically order an absentee ballot. But I'll let Carmen talk about that briefly.
Hi, yes. So this year, we're going to have a normal vote, but people can choose to get an absentee ballot. They do have to fill out an absentee ballot application first and send it to me. And if it's because of COVID, there's a temporary illness checkbox that they'll need to check. And then I will send them out an absentee ballot. Any other questions, Lisa?
Question for you, Carmen. What about somebody who's away at school who normally gets an absentee ballot? Do you send those automatically, or what happens there?
Same process like as years in past. They send an application in, and they temporary out of.
They still have to request it. They have to request it every year. You
still have to send an application. Yes, they still have to send an application in to me.
Okay.
Carmen, where are those applications available?
They are on right now on the website under voter information, or they can call me and I can mail them one.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions on the contingent budget? Any other comments? All right, thank you very much, Enrique, for that very clear explanation.
Thank you.